in this first section, in 3.1, we are talking about equations, which means what am I going to see in all of these problems? What, Morgan? Equal signs. If I'm talking about an equation, I'm going to see an equal sign. And what we're working on is solving this equation, finding the solutions or the values that make an equation true. And we are going to be using inverse operations to do this, which means they undo each other. So inverse is kind of like opposites. When we think of these inverses, we think of opposite operations. Who can give me a pair of inverse operations? Grace? Addition and subtraction. That's one pair of inverse operations. What's another? Ethan? Multiplication and division. So when we are looking at these problems, we want to think, what is the inverse operation? How do I undo this problem to get this equation solved or to get the variable by itself? So here we have all of our properties, and you should have filled these properties in from your book. And what these say, we have already talked about these properties. If I have an equation, so I see an equal sign, we know that what I do to one side, I must do to the other. So if I add c to the left-hand side of the equation, I have to add that same value to the right-hand side. And it goes the same for subtraction, multiplication, and division. So we just need to know what we do to one side, we must do to the other when we are working with these equations. So let's look at these problems, and you should have seen problems like this. We have done problems more difficult than this in this class so far. So you should have this already done in your notes. Jessica, come on up and solve number 1 for us. When I'm solving this equation, why do I subtract 20? Why don't I multiply or divide? Or Jessica? It's the inverse. In the problem, I'm adding 20. I have x plus positive 20 equals negative 10. So to get rid of that 20, I have to subtract it from both sides. So now I have x plus 0. So I have x by itself equals negative 30. How can I check my answer and see if I'm right? Ethan? To what? Okay, so what do we call it when I replace a variable with a number? Chris? Substitution. So to check our answers, we substitute the answer back into the problem. So I take negative 30 plus 20, and I have to see, does that equal negative 10? It does, in fact, equal negative 10, so my answer is correct. You can see, before you turn anything into me, on any quiz or test or any homework or whatever you are doing, you can know if you got the right answer right away. Check your answer. Substitute it back into the problem. If it doesn't work, then you know you did something wrong and you need to go find your mistake. But you can know right away if you have the right or the wrong answer. So we have found the correct answer. So now, and check to see if this answer is right. So we did the inverse of multiplication, divided both sides by 6. Now we need to check and see by substituting if this is the correct answer. Make sure that you are bringing a calculator every single day to class. That is part of your materials. Bring a calculator. You should have one by now. Doesn't have to be a specific type. Just bring one in. Is our answer right? Is 6 times negative 2.5 negative 15? I hear Ethan say yes. Anybody else get that answer? I see some more heads nodding. Okay, good. So our answer checks, and we are correct. We have found the right answer. B equals negative 2.5, negative 2.5, negative 3 halves, however you want to write that answer. Questions about either of these problems that we have done so far? They are not going to get easier from here. They are going to get much more difficult. So if you have questions, make sure you're asking them early so that you don't have tons and tons of questions later on. Let's take a look now at this word problem, and I told you we are going to need to get used to writing equations in this class. And this is one of those problems where we're going to need to write an equation to represent this problem. So first of all, I want someone to just tell me something important that this problem tells me. What's something important, Ethan?
Each carton of eggs contains 12 eggs.
All right, I need to know that. Each carton that I buy has 12 eggs in it. What else do I need to know from this problem? Matthew? I need to buy 450 eggs. That's what I'm trying to get. What else? What else am I going to need to know to write this equation? Ethan? Okay, what is my variable going to represent in this problem? So the variable represents the number of cartons. This is what I'm trying to find. The question is asking me how many cartons. Your variable is going to represent what you are trying to find. I'm trying to figure out how many cartons I need to buy. The variable is going to represent the number of cartons. Remember to be specific when you are naming your variable. Be as specific as possible. We're talking about a number of cartons. If we're talking about the weight, say that we're talking about the weight. If we're talking about, I don't know, hair color, say we're talking about hair color. Whatever it is, be as specific as possible. So now I need to write an equation, which we've already said means I have to have some equal sign somewhere. Grace, do you have that equation? Why don't you come on up and write it? Come on up and write our equation for us. A lot of you had really good equations that I saw. There's one equation. Who has a different equation? Parker, you have a different one? Why don't you come up and write your equation? Let's see what you have. And we'll see if they're the same or if they're different. So Grace gave us the equation 450 divided by 12 equals C. Parker gave us the equation 12C equals 450. Let's look at this equation. What do I have to do to get the variable by itself? Hunter? Divide by what? Okay, so I have to divide both sides of my equation by 12. Do they end up being the exact same equation? So there are two possible answers that you could write for this problem, and I'm okay with either one. I either have to take the total number of eggs and divide it by 12. That's going to tell me how many cartons. Or I can say 12 times the number of cartons has to equal however many eggs that I have. So now I have C equals, and what do we get as our answer for this problem? Matthew? 37.5. So we wrote an equation, we solved it. We got C equals 37.5. Now, the goal is to answer the question. And the question said, how many cartons do I need to buy? Chris?
37.5.
Can I buy 37.5 cartons? Does the problem say I can buy half a carton?
Or 38.
I would need to buy 38 total cartons. Now, sometimes you can get eggs as 6 eggs instead of 12, but this problem doesn't say that I can do that. All they tell me is I have cartons of 12 eggs that I can buy. So we need to make sure we're answering the question. I would have to buy 38 cartons to make sure that I have 450 eggs. 37 isn't going to be enough. I'm going to be half a dozen short. So make sure, especially with these word problems, that you're naming your variables and then answering the question that's asked. Give it a label. Make sure you're giving an answer that makes sense for the problem. Questions about this one? Okay. Let's move on to inequalities. Again, a solution is just something that makes it true. I'm looking for what value or what values make this problem, this equation or inequality true. Equivalent inequalities just have the same set of solutions. So let's look at some inequality properties. And in the addition and subtraction property, are these any different from the equation properties? Are there any differences between the equations and the inequality properties? Grace? They just don't have an equal sign. But is anything else different? No. So the only difference between an equation and an inequality when we're solving them is the sign. So here I'm going to have greater than. If A is greater than B, then A plus C is greater than B plus C. And the same for subtraction. So whether I have an equal sign, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, the addition and the subtraction properties are the exact same. Nothing changes. What I do to one side, I must do to the other, and nothing else changes. It's all the exact same. So let's look at solving these inequalities. And let's take a look at this first. Hit that button for me. Okay, so Hunter said, you can have a seat, thank you. Hunter said we needed to add 3 to both sides, and I'm a little confused. Why am I adding 3 instead of subtracting 3 for this problem? Ethan? 3 is negative, and we have to remember the ultimate goal is to get the variable by itself. So I'm looking at these inverse operations. My goal is to make this 0. I'm trying to get y by itself. And to make this 0, I have to take negative 3 plus a positive 3. That now goes away. I have 0 plus y, and then 2 plus 3 gives me 5. So now I have y is less than 5. Are there questions about that problem? That's a little bit different because it's written a little bit different. But we're trying to think what is going to get the variable by itself. What is going to undo and get rid of this number here? How can I check my answer? How do I check my answers on these problems, Morgan? Okay, Morgan says I need to substitute 5. Is 5 less than 5? No. So what value do I need to substitute? Matthew? Any number less than 5. Give me one. Negative 14. Somebody else give me another one. 4. Grace, give me another one. 2. Parker, give me another one. Negative 3. How many solutions do we have? How many? An infinite number of solutions. Any value less than 5, a decimal, a fraction, a negative number, a rational, an irrational, doesn't matter as long as it's less than 5. I would write down somewhere on your papers, inequalities have an infinite number of solutions. There is not just one answer that works for this problem. Any value that is less than 5 is a solution to this problem. How many solutions did I have for my equations? Just one. I had one exact solution. X equals this number. For my inequalities, I have an infinite number. So I'm going to pick a value. I'm going to pick 0 because I think that's an easy one to work with. Negative 3 plus 0 is negative 3. Is this a true statement?
Yes.
Yes, it is. So my answer is correct. Y has to be less than 5. Now, when you are graphing these inequalities, I only need to see one number on your number line. So if I don't give you a number line and you have to make one, what one value do I need to see on this number line? Hunter? Not quite. What one value is important in this problem? Matthew? 2. Is there... Okay, let's think about in the problem there is, but 5 is the important value in this problem. So really, the only number I need to see on your number line is the number 5. If you have to create a number line, don't go from -10 to +10. Don't put 12 numbers on your line. Just put the one value that you need. Now, what kind of circle do I need here? Grace? Open circle, because I don't have that greater than. And which direction do I need to shade? Grace? To the left. I have less than 5. You can either make a really dark mark on your number line, or if you want to put your arrow up above, I don't care, however you want to do it, make sure I can see which direction you are going. So for these inequalities, you need to show me work. How are you solving? Show me your answer, and then graph that answer. They will ask you for pretty much every problem with an inequality to graph your solutions. So number, circle, and arrow. Those are the 3 things you need on your graph. One number, one circle, and an arrow. Any questions about this problem? Okay, let's take a look at the next one, and I think it's 210 plus p greater than 350. What do we think? Looks like Ethan subtracted 210. Why'd you subtract, Ethan? It's a positive value, so we need to subtract from both sides. And we got an answer of p equals 140. Matthew's shaking his head. Why are you shaking your head, Matthew? Can you go fix it for me? So we were really close. We just want to be careful. Make sure you know what you are solving. Are you solving an equation? Are you solving an inequality? What do we have going on, and stay consistent. So our answer is p is greater than 140. What else do we need in our answer for this problem? We solved the inequality. We got the solutions. What do I need to do, Grace? I need to graph them. I need to have a number line and graph those inequalities. Does someone want to volunteer to go do that? Ethan, you want to go finish your problem? All right, go finish your graph for me. Remember to always graph those inequalities. Make sure that you are reading the instructions for all the questions, because it will usually tell you, solve the inequality and graph your solutions. All right, so Ethan says we need an open circle. And we're going to the right. What do we think? Do we agree?
Yes.
Any questions about either of these problems? Anybody? All right. Let's move on to our last set here. Now we are talking about multiplying and dividing to solve inequalities. So let's think about what do I need to fill in that first blank with? What did your book say was the first blank that we fill in for this property? Parker, what do you have for the first blank?
C is greater than 0.
So if we have numbers A and B, and C is greater than 0, what does that mean? What kind of numbers are we talking about? Morgan? Okay, and what word do we use to describe those numbers? Matthew? Positive values. So anything bigger than 0, we're talking about positive numbers. So what this is saying is, if I multiply both sides of an inequality by a positive number, what do I get? If I have A is greater than B, and I multiply both sides by a positive number, what goes in between them? Greater than. Thank you. So if I have A is greater than B, then A times C is greater than B times C, as long as C is positive. What do I fill in that second blank with? Ethan?
C is less than 0.
So what kind of numbers am I talking about here?
Negative numbers.
Negative values. So now I'm talking about these negative numbers. So if I start with A is greater than B, and then I multiply both sides by a negative value, what's the sign in between them? Grace? So what happened to that sign? What do we do with our sign? We flipped it. So anytime we multiply or divide an inequality by a negative value, it works the same for multiplication and division, I need to flip my sign. This becomes extremely important. This is the only difference that we see between equations and inequalities. If I multiply or divide an inequality by a negative number, I need to flip my sign. Let's look at a couple of examples. Let's look at this first example. I have 2z is greater than negative 2. Steph, what do I need to do to solve this inequality? Okay, why divide? I have to do the opposite. I see multiplication in my problem, so I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So 1 times z is z, and then we have negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So I've divided both sides by positive 2. What sign goes in the middle? What do we think? What inequality symbol is going to go in between these two values? I want you to raise your hand if you think I need to put a greater than symbol in between these two values. Raise your hand if you think it needs to be greater than. Okay, I've got 4. Raise your hand if you think it needs to be less than. You got to pick one. 2, 3, 4. Chris, what do you think? Because you're the deciding factor. Greater than or less than?
Greater.
Okay, so greater than wins. So we are choosing to leave our sign the same. Let's check our answer. What value can I choose to check my answer? I need something greater than negative 1. All right, let's pick 0. Is 0 greater than negative 2?
Yes.
Why didn't I flip my sign? Matthew?
Divide by negative.
I divided by a positive value. When I divide by a positive number, my inequality sign stays the same. I only flip the sign if I multiply or divide by a negative value. So here, my sign stayed the same. I can graph my solution. I need all numbers greater than negative 1 are possible solutions. Let's look at the second one. Negative 2z is greater than negative 2. What do I do to solve this inequality? Morgan? All right, let's divide by negative 2 on each side. 1 times z is z. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1. And what sign goes in the middle? Ethan?
Less than.
Okay, Ethan thinks we need to flip it. Let's check our answer. I need something less than 1. What works? Morgan? Negative 2 is less than 1, so we've got negative 2 times negative 2. And I've got 4. Is 4 bigger than negative 2?
Yes.
So is my answer right? 4 is greater than negative 2. So is my answer correct?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Why did I need to flip my sign this time? Ethan?
Because the number you were dividing by was a negative.
Good. The answer that you get doesn't matter. That doesn't tell you whether you flip the sign or not. It's not whether your answer is positive or negative. It is, what did you do to both sides of the equation? If you multiply or divide by a positive value, everything stays the exact same. If we multiply or divide by a negative value, that's when we flip the sign. questions about either of those problems?